The invitation never came. That's the part nobody understood. Not the wedding planner, not my neighbor, not even me, standing in a parking lot in Sedona in a suit I'd pressed twice because my hands wouldn't stop shaking the first time. I found out about my son's wedding from a Facebook photo. My name is Walter Boone, 59 years old. I've laid concrete in Arizona heat that could peel skin off a car hood, raised a boy alone after his mother left when he was 6, and for 3 years I paid the mortgage on a house he doesn't know I own the debt on. Not the deed, just the debt. That distinction is going to matter a lot before this story's over. I drove 4 hours from Prescott to Sedona on a Saturday morning in October, the kind of crisp desert morning where the red rocks look like they're on fire at sunrise. And I told myself the whole way that there had to be an explanation, a mailing mix-up, a mistake with the RSVP list. My son Colton wasn't cruel. He wasn't his mother. He wouldn't do this to me. Not after everything. I was wrong. If that gut drop feeling just hit you the way it hit me standing in that parking lot, stay close, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't see coming. Hit subscribe and drop a like right now so you don't lose your place. Because I promise you, it gets so much worse before it gets better. The venue was a restored ranch house outside Sedona, string lights already glowing gold against a sky just starting to purple at the edges. I could hear music. I could hear laughter. I stood at the edge of the gravel lot holding a card with $400 in it and a speech I'd rewritten 9 times about his mother, about how proud I was, about the house I built for him with a shed floor where his tricycle used to sit. A woman in a headset intercepted me before I reached the arch of white flowers. "Sir, can I help you find your seat?" "Walter Boone, father of the groom." She looked down at a tablet, scrolled again. Her face did something I recognized instantly, because I'd worn that same face 100 times on job sites when a client's check bounced. I'm not showing you on the list, Mr. Boone. Let me check with the coordinator. This is a mistake. This has to be a mistake. I stood there while she walked away, watching guests I half recognized from Colton's childhood, his old baseball coach, a second cousin from Flagstaff, filing past me into white folding chairs like I was furniture, like I was part of the landscaping. Then I saw him, Colton in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck payment, standing near the arch with a man I didn't recognize, silver-haired, tan, expensive watch catching the light, laughing at something. The man clapped Colton on the shoulder, the way a father claps a son's shoulder. Easy. Practiced. Like they'd done it 100 times. I found out later that man was Richard Calloway, Claire's father, real estate money, 3 golf memberships, a smile like a closing statement. Colton's eyes found mine across the lot. For 1 second, 1 single second, something flickered. Recognition, maybe shame. Then he turned back to Richard Calloway and laughed at whatever he'd said. He saw me. He saw me, and he turned away. I stood there in that gravel lot for what felt like an hour but was probably 90 seconds, while the coordinator came back with an apologetic face and a folding chair she offered to set up in the back, just so you can watch, like I was a stray dog somebody felt sorry for. I said no thank you. I said it politely. That's the part that still surprises me. How polite I was. Ranchers taught me that. You don't make a scene at another man's gate, even when he's salted your well. I got back in my truck. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, engine off, watching the lights flicker on stronger as the sun dropped behind the rocks, listening to a string quartet play the processional for a wedding I helped pay for and wasn't allowed to attend. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about a broken man weeping in a truck. It's colder than that. Something in my chest just went quiet, flat, like a switch somewhere behind my ribs got flipped to off. 4 hours home. 240 miles of dark highway, saguaros standing like sentries in my headlights, and every single mile I replayed it. The coordinator's face, Richard Calloway's hand on my son's shoulder, that flicker in Colton's eyes before he chose the easier direction to look. 3 years, I told myself. 3 years of quiet mortgage payments so he'd never have to worry. 3 years of never once mentioning it to him, because I didn't want him to feel like he owed me anything. And he couldn't even put my name on a list. I got home a little after midnight. My house in Prescott was dark and too quiet, the way it's been quiet since Colton's mother left, and quieter still since he moved out for good at 22. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat down at the kitchen table still wearing the suit, and I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app. 3 years back, when Colton and Claire bought that house in Sedona, a beautiful Adobe-style place with a view of Cathedral Rock, more house than two. 28-year-olds with an event planning business and a junior real estate license had any real business affording. I'd quietly set up an automatic transfer, $2,200 a month, straight to their mortgage servicer. I never told Claire. I barely let Colton acknowledge it beyond a hug and a "thanks, Dad," that always came a little too fast, like he wanted the conversation over before it started. I told myself it was because I didn't want them stressed. I told myself it was because that's what fathers do. Sitting in that dark kitchen, I understood something else, something uglier and truer. I'd been paying to stay relevant, paying for a seat at a table that, it turned out, never had my name on it to begin with. My thumb hovered over the screen. You don't have to do this. You can be the bigger man. You can let it go. Or you can stop being invisible. I found the recurring transfer. $2,200, first of every month, 3 years running, not one payment missed, not once. Not even the month I tore a rotator cuff and worked through it because I didn't want to fall behind. I canceled it. No text to Colton. No angry voicemail. No confrontation in a parking lot with string lights and a stranger's hand on my son's shoulder. Just silence. The same silence I'd been handed all night, handed right back. The confirmation popped up on my screen in small gray letters, almost polite about it. Autopay canceled. I set the phone face down on the table. I sat there in my dead wife's kitchen, in a suit I'd never wear again, and for the first time since I drove out of that gravel lot, I let myself feel exactly how angry I was. 4 weeks, I thought. That's about how long it takes a payment to bounce, if I remember the servicer's grace period right. 4 weeks, and somebody's going to have to explain to me why I wasn't on a list. I had no idea, sitting there in the dark, just how loud that silence was about to get, or that in 4 weeks my son would break it first. I promise you, the moment my son finally reaches out, it is not the conversation you're expecting. If part 1 already has your chest tight, do me a favor and subscribe now so you're here the second it drops. We've only just started. The first week, I almost put the payment back. Twice. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning, old habit from decades of early job sites, and lie there in the dark doing math I didn't want to do. $2,200 a month. Grace period's usually 15 days past due before the servicer starts calling, 30 days before it hits the credit report. I knew those numbers the way I knew rebar spacing and concrete cure times, not because I wanted to, because some part of me was still protecting that boy, even furious, even 3 years into a lie I didn't know I was living. He's your son. You're punishing him for a wedding list. You're punishing him for looking away. Both were true. That's the part nobody tells you about anger like mine. It doesn't arrive clean. It arrives tangled up with love so tight you can't always tell which one's got its hand on the wheel. My name is Walter Boone, and for 11 days after that wedding, I was a man standing very still at the edge of a decision, trying not to fall either direction. What broke the stillness was Vic Halloran. Vic's been my lawyer since a subcontractor tried to stiff me on a Flagstaff job in 2009, and my friend a lot longer than that. Sun-cured, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who says 3 sentences where other lawyers say 30. I called him not for legal advice. I called him because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't my own rattling around my skull at 4 a.m. We sat on his porch in Prescott, coffee going cold, the November air finally carrying a bite the way high desert does once the tourists thin out. You said you've been paying that mortgage 3 years, Vic said. Your name on the deed? No. Loan? No, just, I set up the transfer myself. To the servicer. Vic was quiet a second, the kind of quiet that costs $400 an hour in his office and comes free on his porch. So legally, he said, you've been a stranger sending money to a bank account for 3 years. That house isn't yours, that debt isn't yours, You've got no claim on a single brick of it." "I know that," I almost said. I never wanted a claim on it. I stopped, because I honestly didn't know how to finish that sentence out loud. "I wanted to matter," I said finally. "That's it. That's the whole confession." Vic nodded slow, like a man who'd heard that confession from 100 clients wearing 100 different faces. "Then here's a question for you, Walt. If you'd been paying that mortgage with your name on the deed, you think you'd have been standing in a gravel lot last month?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They didn't erase me because I wasn't useful. They erased me because I made myself invisible on purpose, and invisible men don't get invited to anything. That was the morning something shifted from grief into strategy. Not revenge yet. Not exactly. Just clarity. The particular clarity that comes to a man who's spent 40 years reading blueprints and finally realizes he's been standing in somebody else's house, following somebody else's plans the whole time. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it wasn't clean, and it wasn't entirely noble. I started paying attention. Colton had a cousin, Dane, who still talked to me. Good kid. Worked construction 2 summers under me before college. Texted me happy birthday every year even after his mama and my ex-wife stopped speaking. I didn't manipulate Dane exactly. I just asked questions a curious old man might ask, and Dane, not knowing any better, answered them. That's how I learned Richard Calloway. Silver hair, expensive watch, hand on my son's shoulder like he'd earned the right. Wasn't nearly as flush as the wedding made him look. 2 failed developments outside Scottsdale. A second mortgage on his own house that Dane's mother had heard about through the same gossip chain that runs under every small circle of Arizona families who golf together and pretend not to compare bank accounts. Put together people, performing solvency for an audience, same as the rest of us. I also learned, and this one sat in my chest like a swallowed stone, that Claire's mother, Denise, had spent the better part of a year telling Claire that a man who controls the mortgage controls the marriage. That a 30-year-old man leaning on his father wasn't independence. It was a leash with slack in it. I didn't hear this from Dane directly. I heard it secondhand, from a woman at my church whose sister does Claire's mother's hair every 3rd Tuesday, and small towns being what they are, by the time gossip travels through 3 sets of hands, it usually loses its edges and keeps its shape. So that's it. That's why the list didn't have my name. Somebody decided I was a problem to be managed, not a father to be honored. I didn't confront anybody. I didn't call Colton. What I did instead was quieter and colder and, I'll admit it, a little bit surgical. I pulled every bank statement going back 3 years, every transfer, every confirmation number, $2,200 a month, 36 months, printed and organized in a manila folder like a job estimate. I wasn't building a weapon, not yet. I was building a mirror. Something I could hold up to my son's face when the moment came so he couldn't tell himself a story that wasn't true. I also drove to Sedona once, alone, unannounced, and sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from that adobe house with the view of Cathedral Rock, and I watched it. Not the house, the life around it. Watched Claire load grocery bags into a car that still had a dealer plate. Watched Colton come home from what I now knew was a struggling events business, tie loosened, shoulders down in a way I recognized from every hard year I ever had at his age. They're drowning. Quietly. The same way I was invisible. Quietly. I sat there a long time with a coffee going cold, same as Vic's had gone cold on his porch, and I understood something that cracked something open in my chest. This wasn't a story about a cruel son and a wronged father. It was 2 men, father and son, both too proud and too silent to say the truth out loud, and a house of cards built entirely on that silence. If I put the money back now, nothing changes. They keep pretending. I keep being useful and invisible. That flicker in his eyes at the wedding, that shame, it just gets buried deeper. Somebody has to make the silence cost something. Or none of us ever say what's true. I need to stop right here, because that decision, the one I made sitting in that coffee shop with a view of the house I'd built and wasn't welcome in, is the exact moment this stops being a story about hurt feelings and becomes something else entirely. Drop a comment and tell me straight, if you found out the people who shut you out were quietly drowning anyway, would you let the silence keep going, or would you let it finally cost something? I want to hear where you land on this, and where in the country you're reading from tonight. 4 weeks. That's how long I let it run. 4 weeks of nothing. No call from Colton. No text. No visit. I checked my phone more than I'd admit to Vic, more than I'd admit to myself, half hoping, half daring him to reach out on his own, for no reason at all except that he missed his father. He didn't. What reached out instead, on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of November, with the light already dropping fast behind the Bradshaw Mountains, the way it does once daylight saving ends, was a bounced payment notice from a mortgage servicer in Phoenix, sent not to me, but apparently forwarded, panicked, from Claire to Colton, and from Colton, finally, after 4 weeks of silence, straight to me. I was in my truck when the phone buzzed, just pulled off a 2-lane highway outside Prescott, dust still settling behind me, radio playing something I wasn't really listening to. I looked down at the screen. Colton, the mortgage is due. That was it. 4 words. No, Dad. No, how are you? No mention of a gravel parking lot in October, or a coordinator's apologetic face, or the flicker in his eyes right before he chose to look away from me and laugh with a stranger instead. 4 weeks of silence, and this is what breaks it. Not an apology, a bill. I sat there in my idling truck on the shoulder of that empty highway, watching the last orange light slide off the mountains, and I felt something settle in my chest that was almost peaceful. Almost. He wants his father back the moment he needs something. Let's see if he wants his father back when it costs him something else entirely. I typed out a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that one too. What I finally sent was 6 words long, and I knew, sitting there in the dark with the engine ticking and the desert going cold and silent around me, that those 6 words were about to blow the whole thing open. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. And then I just sat there, watching the 3 little dots appear on his end, disappear, appear again. The 6 words I sent my son were these: so is an invitation. I'll wait. I watched those 3 dots blink on his end for almost a full minute. Appear, disappear, appear again. I could picture him exactly, standing in that adobe kitchen with the cathedral rock view, thumb hovering, trying to figure out if his father had lost his mind or finally found it. Then nothing. The dots vanished for good. Good, I thought, pulling back onto the highway, headlights cutting through the dark toward Prescott. Let it sit. Let it be heavy for once. It took him 3 days. 3 days of a house I now knew was drowning. 3 days of a servicer's automated calls I imagined got progressively less polite. 3 days of Claire, I'd guess, asking questions Colton didn't have honest answers for. He showed up on a Sunday evening, unannounced, headlights sweeping across my living room window, the way they used to when he was 17 and missing curfew. I heard the truck door. I heard his boots on my gravel drive, heavier than I remembered, like the last month had put actual weight on him. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked older than 30. That's the first thing I noticed. Not tired older. Worn older. The specific kind of worn that comes from carrying something you haven't told anyone you're carrying. Dad, his voice cracked on the 1 syllable. Can I come in? Say it. Whatever you came here to say, son, just say it plain. I stepped aside. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd canceled his mortgage a month earlier, and for a long stretch neither of us said anything. I let the silence sit. I'd had a lot of practice with silence lately. Claire's freaking out, Colton finally said. The servicers called 4 times. We're 29 days out from a real problem, Dad. They said if we hit 30. I know exactly how mortgage servicing works, Colton. I've been sending them $2,200 a month for 3 years. He flinched like I'd hit him. I know you have. I never asked you to stop. You never asked me to be there either. My voice stayed level. Flat, almost, the way it had gone flat in that gravel parking lot in Sedona. You just let it happen, both things, isn't that right? He put his head in his hands. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, and something in my chest, the part that had stayed a father through every angry mile of that 4-hour drive home, cracked a little, even as the rest of me held the line. It wasn't Claire, he said. I need you to know that. Claire didn't build that guest list to hurt you. She doesn't even know. He stopped. Doesn't know what? Say it. I already know most of it. I need to hear if you're finally going to be honest. Colton exhaled, long and shaking. Doesn't know you've been paying our mortgage. She thinks it's just us. She thinks I did that. Got us into that house on my own. The events business paying more than it does. Her dad's always going on about how a man in his 30s shouldn't need his father bailing him out, how that's not real independence. And her mom, he shook his head. Her mom told Claire more than once that a father who's still writing checks for his grown son is a father who thinks he still owns him, that it's control dressed up as love. There it is. I set the manila folder on the table between us. 3 years of transfer confirmations, printed and squared, $2,200 a month, 36 times over. I didn't say anything. I just let him look at it. I told myself I was helping, I said. But I never told you to tell her the truth either. I let you carry a lie so I could feel needed. That's on me too, Colton. I'm not sitting here pretending my hands are clean. He stared at the folder a long time. So why'd I get erased from the list if it wasn't malice? If Claire didn't know? Because Richard and Denise decided the story worked better without me in it, he said, voice barely above a whisper. A self-made son-in-law with a supportive father-in-law like Richard, instead of a groom whose real father was quietly footing the bill for a house he couldn't actually afford. Richard offered to help with a coordinator with vendor connections. And somewhere in 3 months of wedding planning, my invite list got streamlined. Denise's word, and I let it happen because saying something meant admitting the truth, that I needed you, that I still need you. Cowardice dressed up as independence. Vic called it that on his porch a month ago, and he was right. You saw me, I said quietly. In that parking lot, you saw me, and you looked away. Colton's face broke completely then, not dramatic, not loud, just a grown man's face, finally giving up the fight to hold itself together. I know. I've thought about that look on your face every single day since. I chose the easy direction to look, Dad, and I've hated myself for it every day since. Here's the part I want to be honest about, because this isn't a story where the wronged man gets to feel purely righteous and walk away clean. I could have let it burn. I could have let that house go 30 days delinquent, let the credit hit land, let Richard Calloway's carefully performed solvency get tested against his own son-in-law's real financial hole. Some petty wounded part of me, the part still standing in that gravel lot getting looked past, wanted exactly that. But punishing him doesn't get you a seat at the table. It just proves you were never really trying to sit at one. It just makes you Richard. It just makes you Denise. I'll cover this month, I told him. The last one. Not because you asked, because I'm choosing to, one more time, on my terms. Colton opened his mouth, gratitude probably, or an apology already forming, and I held up a hand. But it comes with a condition, and it's not negotiable. You tell Claire the truth. All of it, not a version that makes you look less foolish. The real one, that I've paid for that house for 3 years, that her parents pushed me out of the wedding to protect a story that was never true, and that you let it happen because you were ashamed. You tell her at dinner, with her parents at the table, so nobody gets to quietly rewrite this afterward. He went pale. Dad, it'll destroy a lie, I said. The marriage, if it's built on something real, will survive the truth. If it can't survive the truth, Colton, it was never going to survive anyway. I'd rather know now. The dinner happened 12 days later, at Colton and Claire's house, the one with the view of Cathedral Rock going pink at sunset the way it does every evening in that part of Arizona no matter what's falling apart at the table underneath it. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I heard about it after, in pieces, first from Colton shaking on the phone that night, then more calmly from Claire herself 2 days later, who called me directly, which nobody expected, least of all me. He told us everything, she said. My mother tried to talk over him twice. My father left the table. A pause. I'm so sorry, Walter. I didn't know. I want you to know, I didn't know. I believe her. And that's the part that finally lets something in my chest unclench. I know you didn't, I said. That's not on you. I'd like you to come to dinner sometime, a real one, where you're actually invited. Nothing got fixed overnight, and I won't pretend it did. Colton and I are still rebuilding something that took one gravel parking lot in October to nearly destroy and will take a lot longer than a month to repair. Trust doesn't refinance that fast. Richard Calloway hasn't spoken to me since, and I've made my peace with never hearing from him again. Denise, from what I understand, still tells her version of the story to anyone who'll listen. I've stopped needing her to tell mine. But 4 months later, on Colton and Claire's first anniversary, I got an invitation in the actual mail, cardstock, my name spelled right, an RSVP card I filled out and sent back within the hour. I drove down to Sedona on a Saturday evening in March, the desert finally warming again after a long cold winter, red rocks catching that same fire-colored light they'd been catching the night I stood outside a wedding I wasn't allowed into. This time there was a seat with my name on it, right at the head of the table. I didn't bring an envelope of cash. I didn't need to buy my way into anything anymore. I just brought myself. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was finally, quietly, enough. If this story stayed with you, that gravel parking lot, that 6-word text, Colton's face breaking open at my kitchen table, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because there is so much more coming. Drop a comment and tell me, what moment across all 3 parts hit you the hardest, and where in the world are you watching from tonight? I read every single one, and I mean that. Thank you for walking this whole road with Walter and me.